Blue skies means fun days. Helping skydivers with tips and techniques about safety, training and fun jumping from those who know. Hi and welcome to Blue Skies Fun Days. A while back, with the assistance of a Facebook post, I had a discussion on fear. Following this episode, I had a number of people raise other discussion points about skydiving and fear. So I sat down with Nick Daniels from Axis Flight School and explored the subject of fear, drawing on his many years of training and coaching.
So Garnett, you had a great episode, I believe it was episode 90, where you talked about fear and how we can actually constructively use fear in the context of skydiving. And so I think I have a couple things that I would like to maybe add to that. However, I'd like to frame it in the context of the kind of teacher-student relationship. First of all, I'd like to just go ahead and say that fear in general, I kind of almost see like on a spectrum anyway, because it is kind of subjective, right? Everybody feels that differently. And so we could go from maybe okay, I'm maybe apprehensive about something because something is novel, I've never experienced it before, and therefore, sure, I'm going to have some intrusive thoughts, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum might be just absolute sheer terror, right? And so when it comes to the learning and teaching process, I really believe that if you feel you're kind of more on that far end of fear where you're like, man, I feel like I'm going to get hurt or something's wrong, then that basically means to me that somebody hasn't been properly prepared, right? And so that's just really important to, when you're a teacher, you're in a mentorship role, is that you actually read the room, and when you're discussing something with somebody, you're also checking for comprehension. A lot of times people are just taking information, throwing it at the person and hope it kind of sticks. And so one of the things that I like to do is actually start a dialogue and actually check for comprehension to see hey, do you understand this? Intellectually, yes, we understand it as a concept, and then also try to basically build on that, maybe even doing some practical stuff as well, so we can build up and prepare ourselves so that we don't feel paralyzed by fear. Again, fear can be very good. It can be constructive. It helps us with our self-preservation mode, right? That's absolutely necessary. But again, we need to make sure that we're not jumping into something to the point where we feel like, I can't do this. And so as a teacher, I think it's just important that we check for that. And there's ways to do that. You can strike up a conversation, and you can also check for body language, right? There's many different ways to do that. But it's also on the student's part that if you still feel that you communicate to your instructor and say hey, I still have questions on this. And that's really, really important. As far as another aspect I'd like to just broach real quick is the other emotion is, so it's not just fear, but in that learning environment is also frustration. It's very, very common. So I absolutely believe that when we learn something, I think it's great, and we should certainly celebrate those victories, and that can be kind of an emotional high. But then you're also going to find that there are some plateaus or some troughs that we run into as well. And initially, when we learn something new, there is going to be a little bit of frustration because, again, it's a novel experience, it's something new, and sometimes we just have to see something a few times to wrap our head around it or to maybe get the feel for something. However, when things get a little, when things move kind of further down that spectrum and we really start to get frustrated, as a teacher, I try to constantly monitor my students for that level. If something is new, yeah, sometimes they have to be a little frustrated, but if it persists, right, and you see that the performance isn't increasing, then what we might have to do is change strategy or tactics, right? So there's two really good examples for that. So if I have somebody, for example, that I'm working with in the tunnel, and they have a certain goal that they want to achieve, I need to make sure that I present them with information in a way that it's attainable, it's something that they can, and sometimes people even feel like I already know how to do that. It's yeah, but how well do you know how to do this? And it's really good to be able to make sure that everything is layered and we can progress the level of difficulty in a way that it's still constructive. But if somebody jumps too far ahead too quickly, then again, you're going to notice that the student is going to probably struggle for a lot longer, or they might not get it at all, and that frustration just immediately goes through the roof. So then again, if we push too hard, then that was a bad strategy. And so we might have to go back to layering things, maybe going back and brushing up on the fundamentals, and you'll be able to break through that plateau, right? And so that's one thing. Another level where we might see frustration or where we have to change tactics is, for example, if somebody has maybe a physical limitation. So for example, during a canopy course, if somebody needs to learn how to manipulate the rear risers, right? Totally fine to grab those rear risers with the thumbs oriented up and pull down on them, right? But the fact is some people lack the strength to do so, whether it's their grip strength or the arm strength. And another tactic might be to actually grab the rear risers with thumb oriented down, grab them and twist, right? And neither of those, like, they're both perfectly good answers to using the rear risers, but again, now we're working off somebody's strength. What is something that actually works, as opposed to saying like, no, this is exactly how it has to be and there's no other way around it. So there's many ways to do something, and we have to be able to assess what level the student is at and what works best for them. And again, prioritizing, like checking with them like, hey, okay, are they feeling apprehensive or fearful about something? If so, that means I didn't do a good job preparing them, right? And then also making sure that, okay, a little bit of frustration is okay when something is new, but if that persists, I might have to switch something up and provide them with the learning environment that is constructive. The truth is, every single skydive you do is a unique experience, right? So even though I may be participating in something I've done even thousands of times, I have to treat every single skydive like it's a brand new event, right? And so in that regard, that what you were talking about in that episode, that fear about, hey, I'm about to step out of an aircraft, this is a serious business, right? Of course, we need to have that for our self-preservation. So there's maybe a little bit of, just being on edge a little bit. That's good. But the difference, I think, in fear, the level is when when you really start to notice a chemical change. It's like, for me, it would be like, okay, if I start to feel my heart rate increase to the level that it normally wouldn't be, if I start to maybe feel like, okay, I'm sweating a little bit more, my breathing has increased. And so I start to notice these just kind of markers for me. I'm like, oh, okay, check, that's unusual for me. So I think it requires a certain level of personal knowledge of how you respond to certain scenarios. And I think if you start to experience some of those emotions, it's learning how to best deal with them. And fun fact, it's actually one of the reasons why I still compete. I've been competing in skydiving pretty much almost as soon as I started with it. And it's actually something that I kind of enjoy. It's a little bit of like uncertainty, like that performance anxiety, right? How am I going to do? But I never feel terrified or feel like I'm going to die, right? If that was the case, then I wouldn't even make that jump. I would have to pull myself off, and I would have to assess, why do I feel this way? And do some soul searching and try to come up with a strategy to figure that out. And keep in mind, I'm not a psychologist, right? Like, so I'm not a psychologist. I'm not somebody that works in the mental health industry by any means, but I've found that by personally experiencing some of these challenges, whether it's in competition or doing maybe some stunts or something like that, that those are the things I've noticed, and that's kind of what it is that I'm working on. And if I can share that and it helps people just to be aware of those mechanisms, then that's great. But again, there are people out there that need different strategies, things that I may be completely unaware of or I don't know of. And for other people, it might be even something as, it might be medication, it might be other things, I don't know, right? So, but for me personally, while I'm trying to chase something like a goal, and I'm like, I've been working on this for 2 years and I want it to work well, and I feel that performance anxiety, like that's a challenge, it's tough. Well, from personal experience, I can tell you that I've gone through many different stages in my skydiving career. Starting in my 20s, I felt like I was invincible, right? And I was doing stuff that I certainly shouldn't, one, because it endangered myself and also other people. And it's not necessarily that I had the attitude of, screw authority or anything like that. I just genuinely thought I had such good command of my parachute in this case that I was doing all these maneuvers and other people just didn't understand, right, how good I was and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's just very typical for young people to go through that. But as you start to make some mistakes, and maybe hopefully they're just errors, much, much smaller mistakes that we can learn from, you start to realize how impactful your actions actually are, not just to yourself, but to others. And I think that's, when we really start to kind of step back and go like, okay, like, If I want to do cool, crazy stuff, I really need to separate myself from everyone else, right? But if I'm going to be in a scenario where I need to cooperate with other people, then I need to have a little bit more empathy. I need to think about other people and right how we can best assimilate and mesh so that we can ultimately get to the ground safely. And so I think there are personality types out there that really actually kind of feed off of the adrenaline thing. That's kind of like, oh my God, we almost died. That was great, right? And so that's not necessarily going to be, that's not going to last very long, right? That's not a healthy way to be. Personally, I've found a lot more enjoyment out of building skill and challenging myself and doing things that, while yes, I might be pushing the envelope of like what I'm physically capable of, I'm doing it in a way that doesn't affect other people. And I think that's very, very important. So personally for me, I think complacency starts to set in when we start getting really comfortable. And a lot of times that comfort comes in because of routine. And so what ends up happening is when we're doing the same thing over and over again, we kind of let muscle memory do the job and the critical thinking kind of goes out the window. And so that's a lot of times when things get missed, whether it's during gear checks, right, or just any other procedural thing that's really important for safety. Again, pilots, for example, they use checklists, right? And so even though they probably know it by heart front to back, they still will go and grab that checklist and go through it to make sure they're not missing anything. Because again, what they're about to do, what they're about to undertake is a risky activity. And so we need to be able to mitigate that risk. So the same thing is we need to make sure that our brains are switched on. And I think just personally, like when I was talking about being able to check internally with what's going on, is if you start to feel really comfortable or you're kind of like, oh, this is just another jump, that's probably when a flag should come up or a little alarm bell goes off. It's like, okay, hang on, that's the wrong mindset to have. What did I just miss, right? And that's when we can go ahead and do another thorough gear check or whatever it is to make sure that we are going to do the best safety practices for what we're about to do.
Thank you, Nick. I am sure that this will not be the end of the discussion on fear, but I do hope that it has provided some insight into fear management. Have fun, enjoy the sky, and I'll see you next time on Blue Skies Fun Days. For more tips and techniques, click subscribe.